Well, I actually was born in Berlin, Germany. My mother was a German refugee. We came here when I was about a year and a half old. Grew up as a relatively poor kid in New Jersey. I was the oldest brother of six. We lived in basically a one-bedroom apartment. My mom and dad slept on the couch, and we had all six kids crammed into one room. We did reasonably well, the American dream. My father worked hard, and we were able to buy a house and move to a new neighborhood in New Jersey. At 17, I graduated high school just barely. Didn't have any true future, and it was at the height of the Vietnam War, and I was kind of a juvenile delinquent. A judge told me I either join the Navy or I go to school, and I knew I wasn't going to school, so that's what I did. I joined the Navy, and 24 years later, I retired as a lieutenant commander in the Navy. I started out as a hospital corpsman, a medic in the Navy, and worked my way up to become a registered nurse, and then finally a certified registered nurse anesthetist, which I have done for the last 30 some odd years. I retired as a nurse anesthetist a couple of years ago. The art didn't really start until about 10 years ago when I started to put pieces that I had made in my new home here in Las Vegas, and it got recognized by an artist that I knew and said, "Man, you ought to be showing this." So that's how it pretty much all began. Well, there's mainstream artists and there's outsider artists. The outsider artists are artists that most people consider to be completely untrained. They're self-didacts. They've had no exposure really to the mainstream art world. And then there are the mainstream artists that have had some formal training, and some of them very extensive formal training in the arts. I'm somewhere in between. I'm an autodidact. I'm a self-taught artist. But I've been exposed to mainstream art most of my life. I've been lucky enough to have traveled the world in the U.S. Navy, and I've seen a lot of the finest art museums in the world and in Europe, and I was always amazed by the artwork that I saw, and never in my life did I ever expect to be doing this at some point in my life, but here I am. I started doing artwork about 10 years ago, and it's blossomed into a bit of a business that I never expected. Now, I'm one of the few artists in the country that uses leather as a sculptural medium, and the leather work came to me because I had worked with a friend of mine in a custom motorcycle business, and we didn't have anybody to make the seats, and I decided, well, I can do that, and I taught myself how to do leather work, and once the business didn't fare too well, and I had all this leather I didn't know what to do with, I started to experiment with it. I learned a little bit about a technique called cuir-belé, which basically translates to boiled leather, and it was a technique that was used in medieval times to fashion sheaths for knives and protection for glassware, that type of thing. My technique is a little bit different. It's similar to the technique that a lot of people use to make holsters for guns, but I use a much thinner type of leather, and what I do is I wet it and I shape it as I dry it, and it still maintains some of the flexibility of leather, but it does maintain its shape. And once I have it shaped, then I go ahead and put airbrushed acrylic finishes on it. Yeah, pucker is a wet molded leather piece that I made, and it has its lips are puckered, and one of my friends likes to come over and stick her finger in that pucker and say that it brings her good luck. So if it does, that's great. I'm hoping I can pass that on to someone. No Time for the Refugee. That's one of the pieces that really resonated with me for a couple of reasons. It's a piece that's wet molded leather, and it signifies the grief that a Syrian mother must have felt when her child had drowned on a crossing between Syria and Greece. There was a picture in the paper of a young boy that really struck me, and I felt like I had to do something. And I came up with this piece. It's mounted on an old clock that no longer works. I used a mannequin head for that piece, and the beauty, when I was finished with it, I felt like it really brought the woman's grief to the forefront. And my wife later said to me, she said, that mannequin, that head that you had was painted so beautifully and had such a beautiful face on it. And that, I think, is something that she recognized because she saw it being constructed, and something that I didn't even think about while I was making it. But here's this beautiful woman who's now found such sorrow, and you wouldn't know that unless you knew a little more history about the piece as it was being made. Well, I think what makes mine unique is my choice of components. I take a great deal of time to find things that have been hand forged or hand carved. I look at my assemblages as a collaboration with individuals from the past. I love to use unique items, things that no one has ever seen before, or things that have only been created by one individual, and there's no match for them anywhere. I think that's one of the most important reasons that mine stands out. There was a neighbor who was actually an Italian immigrant who was a phenomenal painter, and I remember my mom bringing him a postcard of a church that she remembered from her youth in Austria, and he painted this beautiful painting, and it hung in our house our entire life. And I always admired that painting, and I think that was my first real exposure to any artwork that I can remember. I even have trouble calling myself an artist. I feel like it kind of minimizes what these true artists do, who spent their entire lives training to be artists and going to school and honing their craft. So, and for me, it's almost hard to call myself an artist, although a lot of the people would call me that. So I guess that's where I'm at. I forgot to get into the question.
That's all right.
I think it took me a while. In the beginning, the artwork I was making was only for myself, and after a while, I enjoyed making art, but I didn't feel like I really had a connection with the pieces that I was making. It was more superfluous. It was just something to put on a shelf or to hang on a wall. And then I started to really feel like I wanted to tell a story with the artwork. So it took a while. It probably took me 3 years before I realized that people were looking at my artwork and enjoying it for a different reason than I was. And I think that's when I started to learn that I could make a difference with the art. I get inspiration from all over the place. I mean, I get inspiration just sitting in this room and looking at my bins of pieces and parts. I get inspiration from me in another life, I ran an antique business, and for me it was the hunt was the whole reason for being in that business. I enjoy going into people's attics and barns and seeing what I could find. I was a picker before the show was ever on TV, and I think that's part of the inspiration for my work is the find. It's going out and looking for the pieces, and what will I find today that I'm going to be able to present tomorrow in some kind of cohesive artwork. I think what I try to do with my art is to just get a reaction. I don't really care if it's a positive reaction or a negative reaction, but I want people to look at it, and I want people to have some type of an emotional response to it. And that's what I crave, I think, more than anything else. If people buy my art, that's great, and they take it home and they enjoy it for a lifetime. But I also I feel satisfied with the result of somebody walking by and saying, "Woo, what the hell was that?" That's almost as satisfying as somebody buying a piece and taking it home. Well, there's all kinds of people in history that I admire. I think there's a lot of reasons to look up to, the heroes of our country, of art. But I look up the most to my brother-in-law. My brother-in-law John is a Vietnam veteran. He came home from Vietnam and became an electrical lineman. Was working on a high voltage line one day and was unfortunately electrocuted to the point where he suffered burns over 85% of his body, had his arm blown off at the shoulder, had over the years over 200 operations, was resuscitated 7 or 8 times during the course of his treatment. He's survived it remarkably well, and he's active. He goes golfing, despite the fact that he has only one arm, and he now teaches amputees from the Iraq and Afghanistan war how to golf. That's pretty amazing. Well, every piece is different. Shaping metal like this piece that I'm doing now, this will take me days just to get it shaped, and that doesn't include having to polish it, flame paint it, and do all the other things that I need to do to make it a functional piece of art. It takes weeks. It takes weeks to do all of the searching for the components, matching up the components, wet molding the leather, finishing the leather, putting all the pieces together. I've listened to music my entire life. I was in a band when I was a teenager, not for very long. We weren't very good, and so I started out listening to the Moody Blues, Jimi Hendrix, Clapton, and over the years I've kind of changed my style of music. Don't get me wrong, I still listen to classic rock. I love all the bands from the 70s, the 80s, but I also have branched out into the more recent music. But my real love is blues. I love blues guitar, Joe Bonamassa, Walter Trout, people like that, and that's they're the soundtrack to my studio. I mean, I've always got them playing while I'm working. And they inspire me in a lot of ways. Sometimes my pieces are named after songs that inspired. The Bat Out of Hell. I'll show you that piece here in a minute. About a year ago, I purchased a collection of rear decks to tricycles, and I think most of us remember riding around on a tricycle, and we'd put our foot on the deck between the rear two wheels, and we'd push off, and they were made in all different shapes and sizes, and I bought a collection of about 12 of them, and I decided I was going to do a piece of art that's distinctly different, but all having this the one component was going to be the tricycle deck. Bat Out of Hell is one of the pieces that I created with that. I've used several different components in there, antique components. I've also used a large piece of driftwood that resembles a big lick of fire, actually. And I made a bat out of the tricycle deck and some tooled leather. Trying to find an inspiration for all these tricycle decks has been a challenge. And while I was trying to figure out what to do with the next piece, the song "Bat Out of Hell" came along on my playlist by Meatloaf, and all of a sudden I thought, man, that kind of looks like a bat. Let's see what we can do with it. So. Bat Out of Hell was born. I think my favorite is the big room. The big gallery room is just so cool. It's you walk in and you're just surrounded by incredible artwork, and the music system that's installed in the room really lends itself to making the whole thing an experience. And I think that's probably my favorite room. What I've been doing is I've been trying to do pieces that are inspired by other artists. I'm trying to do three-dimensional interpretations of paintings. Comfortably Numb is a piece that has I don't know how do you describe that of somebody grinding themselves up in an old meat grinder, and it was inspired by the painting Goodbye Cruel World by a guy named Ken Howard, who most people know by the name Von Dutch. He was a pinstriper motorcycle designer and custom car guy back in the 1950s and 60s. The other piece that we have in the gallery right now is Screaming Nature, and that's my 3D interpretation of the famous painting by von Munch called The Scream of Nature. Yeah, I think that's probably the most common question is what inspired me to create a particular piece, and I think that's because I think when you see a landscape, everybody knows what inspired you. You look at a landscape and there it is, and yeah, it's inspirational to some artists, and for me, my inspirations run a lot differently. That's why I'm the oblique artist. I think my inspirations are a little oblique. I'm just so thankful that Kim has decided to show with me. Her artwork has been an inspiration to me over the last couple of years, and it's a real honor to have her stuff hanging next to mine. We've talked a lot about this show, and we're really excited not only to present our work, but also to present the music that we're going to use to, the music that we paint to and that we work to is something that I think is important for people who appreciate, and by seeing our artwork and hearing the music that we enjoy as we work, I think is going to be an important aspect of this show. So I'm really so thankful that Kim is showing with us, and we're so happy that we're going to be showing here at AV Gallery, where you're going to be able to not only see
what we think is pretty great art, and also to experience some music on equipment that's just superb.